Okay, so I'm a little late in getting out the weekly recap. I'm sorry about that. So I'm going to go from Monday to Monday again, up through Christmas. And then I was going to do this on Christmas, and I was like, I really don't want to do a weekly recap on Christmas Day. I'll do it on Tuesday. And then Tuesday, we're dealing with the giving campaign. It's just like really starting to pick up, and like I was really amazed by that. So I'm sorry about that. And then. I just couldn't like wait any longer. So here's Monday, the 18th of December through the 25th. And then next week I'll continue with Tuesday forward. Okay, so Monday the 18th, the big story, and as we're recapping, like I did it last week where we did a big story and then here's what you might not have heard. And then the big story, and here's what you might not have heard. So the big story on Monday the 18th was Ukraine's military chief says that one of his offices was bugged. In hindsight, like we're thinking, wow, what's going on? We haven't heard a lot since that story actually happened. I've seen some follow up, but they haven't really decided anything or determined anything since that's happened. The story that you might not have heard was Putin signs a decree on the simplification of naturalization of Belarusians, Kazakhs, and Moldovans. Like, you don't have to live in Russia for 5 years now. You can there's a very smooth process to become a Russian citizen. Okay, I'm going to quote here. According to the decree, citizens of the three countries do not have to prove permanently that they permanently stayed in Russia for 5 years after obtaining residence permit. They also are exempt from the exams of knowledge of Russian history and statehood. Belarusian citizens are also freed from the language test. So Putin's trying to smooth it within Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Moldova, which is I find really interesting. And of course, Ukrainians are being forced in the occupied territories to take on Russian statehood or citizenship. Okay, next, Tuesday, December 19th. Russian defense minister announces Ukraine's losses in 2 years of hostilities. And of course, the losses that they announced for Ukraine are far higher than either the US or Ukrainian estimates about Russian losses, but it's made up. That's the big story that day. The story that you might not have heard was that Putin's talking in Pravda about how, well, it's carried in Pravda, but she's talking about how the US wanted to munch Russian historical territories. Like, this is his reason for things. No, we weren't that excited about you before, and we're only focusing on you because of what you're doing in Ukraine. Before that, we were just kind of happy to ignore you. Okay, Wednesday, 20 December. Ukraine, the big story was that Colorado handed Trump a political gift by barring him from the ballot, and this affects Ukraine. How does it affect Ukraine? Well, because it makes Trump bigger. Believe it or not, it's a weird thing. I don't understand it fully, but every time that he is handed an indictment or goes to court or whatever, or he's being removed from being on the ballot, and this will go to the Supreme Court and be overturned. So it's being removed in Colorado by the Colorado State Court, and it'll be overturned, but every time something like this happens, it makes him bigger. And when it's overturned, it'll look like he's proven that he's right. And so this affects Ukraine, at least indirectly, because Trump is not going to be a healthy thing for Ukraine if he is elected. And that's what it appears to be. Okay. But the story that you didn't hear that day was that Russia fines Google for not deleting false information about Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. And this has happened before, but it's just the gall. When they put out false information about Ukraine all the time, to do that to Google is just unbelievable. Okay, Thursday, 21 December. On Thursday, 21 December, the big story was about Prigozhin. There was an article that was starting to come out about Prigozhin. I'm going to talk about that for the next day as well. But the other article that I thought was amazing was Kyiv repels major Russian drone attack as Putin forces are hit by mouse fever. Yeah, so there are mice in the trenches that are spreading disease, and the Russians tend to have fairly poor hygiene practices wherever they are. They don't keep that kind of disciplined environment, and so it's spreading pretty fast, as according to these articles. Now, what you didn't hear about that day was Warthog was reinstated. And I spent a lot of time over the last week and a half before this dealing with Warthog Defense being removed from YouTube, got like completely removed from YouTube. And we beat the drums, and apparently there were enough of you that came out and complained. It got YouTube's attention. They reinstated Warthog Defense. Tremendous victory. And by the way, the last video that I just put out, reporting from Ukraine Spanish channel has been demonetized. So we need your help again, because it looks like there are bots that are demonetized for having too many bots going to the channel. Doesn't seem to me that reporting from Ukraine was doing it, but it does seem like a pretty significant possibility that Russian bots might have been doing that, perhaps in order to get them demonetized. I don't know. But YouTube needs to take a closer look at this. Please go back to that video. Okay, next day. This is Thursday or Friday, December 22nd. So the Kremlin's responding now to the Wall Street Journal's article of Patrushev being behind Prigozhin's murder. Now, we all knew that he was being murdered. I mean, and nobody was surprised that this was actually retribution for what happened. I thought that Putin would have been behind it rather than Patrushev, but nonetheless, Putin knew about it, Patrushev did it, and the Kremlin saying, the Wall Street Journal, you believe them? Like, seriously, like, that's what Peskov was saying. There was a second big story that day as well, the hunt for SU-34s. 3 SU-34s were shot down, and it was really surprising to the Russians, and that was the big thing. The overlooked story on Friday was that Germany sent another military aid package to Ukraine, and Germany's just been stepping up in a very, very big way for the defense of Ukraine, and good on Germany. Saturday, 23 December. So the big story was this anti-war candidate was barred from the Russian presidential election, and she probably dodged a bullet. She was struck as invalid for multiple errors in the application itself, and so she never got to the place where she even had to drum up the signatures. So they're afraid of her, and they apparently were disqualifying her because they didn't want anybody of any substance to be running against Putin. The story that you probably didn't see that day was that the SBU, the Defense Ministry, they eliminated a theft scheme during the purchase of shells and other ammunition for the Ukrainian army. The theft scheme was to the tune of 1.5 billion hryvnia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that money right, but so that means it's something like many millions, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not the same as billions of hryvnia, but it's a lot of money. And they eliminated the defense scheme. Now, there was a couple articles the day before that were really interesting in relation to this. Like, there were full-throated articles about here's why we have to report bad news, including things like graft and other things that we otherwise wouldn't want to report, but we need to do it anyway. And I think it's healthy that we're seeing, not healthy that the guy was doing this, because that's a pretty jerk move to be doing, like lining your pockets in the middle of the war like that. But that they're reporting it, that they're willing to report it, I think is a really healthy thing for the society. Okay, Sunday, the 24th, this is Christmas Eve. The big story was that Ukraine was marking Christmas on December 25th instead of Orthodox Christmas later in January. The story that you probably didn't see was that Senator Graham revealed the main snarl to bipartisan deal on the border in Ukraine. And that is, now again, this is in American politics, but it affects funding for Ukraine. The big holdup is, what do? Do you parole them? Do you take them into do you send them back? Do you keep them from coming into the country? Or do you parole them and then say, show up for court on this date, and maybe they come back, maybe they don't? That's the big holdup. So we isolated the one major thing that if they can get past or figure out how to fix this, they can get the deal. Monday, Christmas Day, December 25th, 2023. Ukraine claims to shoot down 2 more Russian fighter jets the night before, and so they're up to 5 Russian jets in just a couple of days. That was the big story. But the story that you might not have seen was that they found Alexei Navalny. He was discovered in a remote Arctic penal colony. Apparently the Russians don't want him talking and stirring up, you know, everybody vote for this alternative candidate against Putin instead of Putin really wants to win and win by well, he's going to win, right? We know that. But he wants to show that he's won by a huge margin because for some reason in his mind, he thinks that if he can show that he's won 90%, it's really a show of support rather than a show that, no, that's corrupt. In free democratic elections, if you win 60% to the other guy's 40%, it's a blowout. But 90%, that just shows you're corrupt. Okay, so that's it for the last week. I'm sorry that it took so long, but there was just other complications getting in the way of Christmas and then the gift giving. And by the way, please go back to those videos and see about how much was raised. It's still going on, and we're going to keep pressing on giving to Ukraine thermal underwear and drones and tourniquets and all kinds of things, gauze, between now and New Year's Day to just see how much we can put in the hands of the frontline troops. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.